I, alongside pretty much everyone else who knows what they're talking about, recommends keyword scanning for verbal reasoning on the UCAT. And it's for good reason. It saves you a lot of time. It means you don't have to read the entire passage. However, there is one issue with it. Questions like these. What keyword do you scan for here? You essentially have to read, or at least have a decent understanding of the entire passage to even have a chance at a question like this. So, what do you actually do with them? Well, that's what this guide is going to discuss. It's going to talk about a pretty unconventional way to approach these questions, which can allow you to answer it even while using keyword scanning. So, the advice is this. Say you get this question as one of the first three questions on the block of four questions on a passage. So each passage has four questions on it, right? If this question is one of the first three to come up, what I recommend you do, you skip the question, you answer the other three questions on the passage, and then you immediately come back to this question on after answering the other three questions. So I'm not talking about flagging it and saving it for the very end of the section. I'm saying you literally just answer the other three questions first and answer this one as the final and fourth question on the passage. So essentially, you just rearrange the order of the questions. Now, why is this actually useful? Well, it's for one simple reason. When you answer the other three questions using keyword scanning, then essentially what happens is you get an understanding of the passage. You familiarize yourself with it because, of course, keyword scanning, it's not like you just find the keyword and that gives you the answer. You still have to read quite a bit of the passage a lot of the time. Also, you're going to have to be skimming the passage during that time. And as you answer the question, essentially, you're going to pick up small bits of information about the passage. You're also going to pick up the general tone and vibe of the passage. So what this does is it means you can then come back to the unkeyword scannable questions, as I like to call it. So you come back to that unkeyword scannable question, and oftentimes you're able to answer it without even having to read any more of the passage. For example, this question, the one I showed at the start, is essentially just based on the tone or vibe or overall theme of the passage. There's not a specific kind of point or piece of information that you need to find in the passage. You essentially just go based on how you feel. And once you answer the other three questions on the passage, you get a pretty good feeling for what the author believes, how the author writes, and that allows you to select the correct answer. You can tell straight away that it's not going to be A based on the tone of the passage. C also seems quite unlikely. And eventually, it just leads you to get the answer D, since that is essentially what the passage describes. And to find that out, you would either have to read the entire passage, which is going to take way too long and take you over that 2 minute threshold, or you could just answer the other three questions on the passage, which were more keyword scannable. These were the other three. And once you answer those three, you have that sense of the passage and you can just get straight back into the question and save yourself a bunch of time. So, there's one scenario where you are literally able to just answer the unkeyword scannable question straight away after answering the other three. But that's not always going to be the case, right? The world isn't sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. And sometimes it's going to be the case that you're still going to have to read quite a bit of the passage to answer this unkeyword scannable question. Sometimes that's just reality. So, what is the point of it in this scenario? Well, I would argue it's still beneficial in this case. And that's because while you're answering the other three questions on the passage, you're also going to get a sense of the structure of the passage. You're going to get a sense for what topics are discussed in which paragraph. So it's going to speed up the process of keyword scanning for this final fourth difficult question. So say it's a question like this, where it's not one based on tone, but one based more where you have to essentially check each statement and see whether they are true or not. It's still going to be beneficial for this because you're going to know where to look to check each of the statements. So you see how even in the worst case scenario, it's still beneficial because you get that sense of the structure of the passage. So it essentially speeds up the process of answering the question, even if it doesn't completely eradicate the time you have to spend reading the passage. So hopefully that's convinced you that this is going to be a good idea. And next, I'm just going to discuss how you implement it and some kind of exceptions to this rule. So, what actual specific question type should this be used for? Essentially, it's going to be any one where it asks what the author's opinion would likely to be, any one where it's like which of the following statements is most likely to be true, or which one of the following statements is least likely to be true or likely to be false, or which one of the following statements is supported by the passage, or which one of the following statements is not supported by the passage. Essentially, any question where there is no keyword inside the actual stem of the question. So, the stem of the question is the bit that actually has the question mark in it. And then, of course, the answer options are the A, B, C, and D part. So, whenever you see a question like that, what my recommended process for you is to essentially see that question and then not even read the answer options, just immediately skip past it. And I would do this if it was the first question in the block of four, if it was the second question in the block of four, even if it was the third question in the block of four. I still think it would be worth it to answer that fourth question first and then just come back to it straight away. Now, you might be asking, what do you do if you get the first question on the passage? It's one of these unkeyword scannable questions. Then you go to the next question and it's another one. Then you go to the next question and it's another one. And then you go to the next question and it's another one. First thing I'd say on this is that this doesn't really happen in the official question bank questions and in the actual exam itself. Usually there's going to be at least one or two questions where they are keyword scannable. I think it's just Medify sometimes has questions where all four are unkeyword scannable. So, first of all, I think that's very unlikely to actually happen in the actual exam. What I would say with that is that that's the perfect question type to just completely skip. I usually believe that you shouldn't skip entire verbal reasoning passages based on the actual passage, but instead the question type, because I found in my own practice that it's the question type itself that determined whether a question was quick or slow to answer. For example, if you've got a long passage, but it's just a simple identify the keyword, extract the information, that's going to take less than 30 seconds. Whereas if it's still a short passage, but you have to read that entire passage to answer the question, that's obviously going to take a while. So I think you can almost kind of count it as a blessing if you get four or even three of these unkeyword scannable questions, because most people are not going to be able to answer all the questions in the given time. Most people are going to have to skip at least one passage. So you may as well make it this tricky passage or tricky block of four questions and save time for the easier ones that often come up later. And then the last thing I'll talk about with this actual question type itself, which isn't related to the technique I've been discussing, but it's just a small tip I have, is to essentially check the statements that make the most sense first of all. Now, I'll use the example that I showed at the beginning of the video for this. I personally would not check the statement English is superior to other languages straight away. Why is that? Well, to me, that just seems like an answer option that is very unlikely to be true. Remember that verbal reasoning passages are non controversial, they're not really expressing fringe viewpoints. And it's a pretty controversial thing to say that English is a superior language to others, right? So I just think straight away that's unlikely to be the author's opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the other statements first, see whether they seem more plausible, see whether there are any keywords I can scan for there. And then essentially that means that I'm more likely to find the correct answer as being one of the first two or three statements that I check instead of it being the last statement that I check. And then another tip I have is that once you find the answer that is supported by the passage, to just move on straight away. Remember that in verbal reasoning, if a statement is true, it's going to be the right answer, right? I know that sounds obvious, but people will often find a perfectly correct statement and then still check the other ones for some reason just to kind of make themselves feel more confident in their answer. But you don't have time for that. Once you find a statement that is true, select it and move on, because they're not going to have two statements be answer options and only one of them be the correct answer, right? So be confident with the answer choice you make once you make it, and just move on, because these questions already take a long time and you don't want to be spending more time weighing up between two options when you've already found the correct one earlier, right? So that's just my kind of general advice for these questions. But I think the main thing that you can implement today in your next practice is that idea of leaving them till last in the block of 4 questions. And you don't necessarily need to start doing that in on-time practice. Just remember to do it when you do your next mock. And of course, if you forget it, write that down in your reflection, commit yourself to doing it next time, and you should be good to go.